My sisters and brothers, the way the liturgical calendar is laid out, the Sunday within the octave is always the Feast of the Holy Family, unless there's no Sunday in the octave, like next year. When Sunday shows up on Christmas, the next Sunday is January 1st, and the Solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God, overrides the Feast of the Holy Family. Part of what this feast is here to do is to continue to unfold the ongoing mystery of the Incarnation, which began, of course, celebrating on Christmas Eve. By placing this particular feast here during the time we are celebrating Christmas, it emphasizes again that Jesus was a real person, born in a real place, in a real time, to a real family. This is not some mythical place or time. It is not some undetermined future, but is a very concrete time and place in a particular community of Israel into which God sees fit to become incarnate. And part of the reason that we speak about the Holy Family is to focus on one part of the mystery of the Incarnation. Now, because this happens to be year C, one of the benefits of that is you get the alternate readings that you heard today that show up only during the C reading cycle. And in fact, the Johannine epistle that you heard in the second reading does not typically show up during the Sunday cycle. It shows up in the daily cycle. And so it's another reason to look closely at what is it that we mean by incarnation and how is that affecting who we are as a Christian people. When we hear the gospel, and Jesus speaking in the gospel with the elders and the teachers of the law, we get a little bit trapped up by the way we think about law in modern times. We have a very different concept of law than they would. And if you instead substituted the word relationship, you'd be a little bit closer to what they were getting at. Think of not so much Jesus debating the laws with the teachers and the elders, so much as talking about what does a relationship with God look like. And if that mentality could bring that idea to what they were talking about, you'd be pretty close to what the sacred writers were getting at and the way they would have thought about those concepts. Because part of what Israel was about was making manifest their relationship to God by living in a particular way. And so you hear Jesus not only living out that way of living. You notice his parents brought him to the temple for the Feast of the Passover, but he's actually talking about what does that way of life look like for the community at large. And here Jesus is speaking with the elders and the priests. Now, one of the unusual things about this is where this took place. Remember here, Mary comes up to him and says, "Son, why have you done this?" What we miss, because we don't visit the Temple of Jerusalem very often, now that it's been destroyed, is he could not have been in the inner part of the temple. Because if you had been at the temple in that time and place, the center was the Holy of Holies that the priest went into once a year. The next courtyard out, remember, was the temple of courtyard of the priests, so only the priests could enter. Beyond that was the court of the men, and the women could not enter. Beyond that was the public area that both men and women could be in. And so if Mary came up to him, by definition, he had to be in the public area of the temple. Otherwise, she could not have found him. And Joseph would have been having that discussion instead. And so when we think about where this is happening and where we encounter the life that God gives to us, it is very public. It is where it is seen by all. That's part of the mystery of the Incarnation that this reading focuses us on. That this is God made visible, God accessible to all. And you hear that in the presidential prayers at today's Mass. Luke reinforces that by saying both men and women were able to see this event take place and hear how Jesus was speaking about the relationship of Israel and believers to God. In the second reading, you hear that being picked up again when John starts talking about who are we. For John, he brings out rightly that the mystery of the not only about Jesus, the second person of the Trinity taking flesh and being born as Jesus of Nazareth, but is also about us and our relationship with God. Because in the mystery of the Incarnation, not only does God take flesh, but God continues to be incarnated because God also lives within us, he reminds us. That just as important as it is that God takes flesh, and God enters into creation, and God enters into the human reality, so too the human reality is joined to God when we take up that same relationship. John emphasizes what this relationship looks like when he says, when we follow the commands of God, when we ourselves live out of this relationship of love of God and neighbor that we have been called to. When we are doing these things, God is living in us as well. So it's very critical that we understand rightly as we talk about the Feast of the Holy Family, that we are talking about the incarnation, not only of God the Son as a human person, but that we ourselves are called into this relationship so that God who dwells in us is also being made manifest in how we live. When we see and we think about Jesus appearing in public, as he did in the temple, talking about what this relationship looks like, we can think of the very concrete ways in which Israel made manifest its faith. In the same way, John in his letter calls us to do the same, to be about what we are called to be, which is to be the children of God, living publicly and making manifest that relationship by how we live and be in the world. He goes on to tell us, as you heard, what we will be has not yet been revealed, but we do know that we will be like him, because what is God calling us to do? It is precisely to live as God does, to be in the world as God is, to allow God to transform us so completely that not only are we called the children of God, but we make manifest that relationship in our world. As we are together celebrating the Feast of the Holy Family, as we are celebrating God who takes on flesh, we are also celebrating the relationship that God has brought about through the Incarnation, a relationship that is extended to us and our families, is extended into our world through the power of God's graciousness and love that we are now called to bring forth into our world and to make manifest and to share with others. As over these days of Christmas, we continue to focus on and meditate on the incarnation of Christ, we also focus on and make more and more manifest the relationship of God to us and to one another.